This is Voice of the Bus, Mark Johnson, and you're listening to the Folsom Frenzy Podcast.
Welcome to the Folsom Frenzy Podcast. My name's Jake. I'm here with the usual suspects, Reyes, Topher, Chase, and we have a very special guest, Dalton Wasserman from PFF. He's here joining us. Dalton, we're excited to have you on. I know it took us a while to schedule this. I know you've already been on with our friends at DNVR. I think we both had a great idea to reach out to you, mainly because PFF has been really unbiased when it comes to Colorado. And we've seen just a bunch of news outlets just hate on CU without looking at the numbers or the players. So we're really excited to have you on. Welcome to the show, Dalton.
Yeah, I appreciate it big time, man. It's been a fun season for Colorado, and that's really what we try to do here is just break down the tape and give that quantitative kind of objective analysis for not just Colorado, but every team in college football and the NFL that we do. We even get into Canadian football nowadays too. So we just try to give it that look as simply as we can. Just look at the tape, get the grades in, get the stats in, all that stuff, and then we can evaluate it from there. There's always a mixing of tape watch and the scouting style stuff and the analytics. I think a good mix of it is always good to look at. But to look at it of just the lens of what we see in the tape, I think honestly that's the best part of what we do.
Cool. And for the folks listening, not on YouTube, but Chase has a large Skyline chili background right now. I think he threw down the gauntlet by talking trash about Skyline chili. Dalton is based out of Cincinnati and is a big Skyline chili fan. But Chase, I need to call you out just for trashing Skyline chili without even trying it.
Yeah, and I did fess up to that. I hopped on a Cincinnati podcast. Our friends over at the Beer Cats did a nice preview episode, but we did hop on. I apologize as far as, I have not tried it. I'm willing to try it. Told him I would drive out there to try it. If we lost, he is theoretically supposed to eat some Rocky Mountain oysters now, although the logistics on that are a little bit challenging. So I don't know if I'll hold him to that necessarily, but I get it. I didn't expect that. Naturally, Jake went ahead and clipped that exact comment and then put it all over Twitter for everyone to see. It's kind of a throwaway comment at the end of the episode, but I come in with peaceful intentions. I'm open to the concept. So I'm sporting it behind me today as my background.
Dalton, I will say I've had Skyline chili twice. The first time was takeout, and I thought it was disgusting. And then the second time we went into the restaurant in Cincinnati, and I thought it was pretty good the second time around. So I was coming around to Skyline chili, but yeah, I just had to mention that before we got started.
Oh, yeah, no, I get that. I could see where the feel of it, like sitting in there and getting it fresh is better. But no, certainly you have to do it once, right? To be honest with you, I live here, but I came here recently. I'm not even a Cincinnati native, and it's usually the natives that love it more. I'm actually originally a New Yorker, so it's like, I don't know, it's just a thing that you have to do it once, and a lot of people either really love it or really hate it. But I'm in the former group. I'm telling you right now, at least do it once, just get it out of the way and see where it goes. And whatever your opinion is, it is what it is. But I'm a fan. I could see absolutely though the takeout versus the sit-in argument. Totally.
So
yeah, yeah. So you mentioned a little bit about how you guys get into the film. So can you talk like a 30,000-foot view? What is kind of the process behind the scenes of like, do you guys have a big team that's all watching individual games of individual players, or do you have like you are in charge of this game and you have to individually do individual players, or how does it kind of work? And then what do the grades kind of mean? Is it like this grade is a number that spits out, but a left tackle and how they play is not comparable to how a quarterback and how they play. So these numbers, how can we kind of compare them to each other?
Yeah, so honestly, the process is like we have during the season, especially for college, like we have hundreds of analysts. It's somewhere between like 500 and 600 analysts, and I did the grading before this year. I got switched to content this year, but I did everything on that side, on the data side, for the last 4 years. So I know the ins and outs of it, and what it comes down to is we've got any given game, it's like 10 to 12 people at various stages that work on it. There's these stats, there's like base stats, there's player charting. We have guys that do the grades. Then there's a bunch of all 22 work that we do once we get that stuff. So there's really 2 run-throughs we do of every game. So everything isn't just, the first run on the TV cut. We do get that, but we also get the all 22 and we look at things from that angle. There's certain things you just can't see with the broadcast side. And as far as the grades go, it spits out a number, absolutely. And it's a lot of it is about understanding the numbers and kind of what the ranges of numbers mean, right? Because we have a scale of how we grade every single play. So we won't sit and like watch the game and then grade like the whole thing of everything we could remember at the end. That's not how that works. We have a system of going through every single play and looking at all 22 guys on every single play. And then it kind of racks up. We have whatever algorithms and stuff we have that people smarter than me made, honestly, that spit out that final number. But I think more than the exact number, say if a guy's an 80 versus an 80.5, like that's really a minuscule difference. It's about understanding the ranges of it, right? So if I went through the grades right now, if you're talking about a 60, okay, it really starts right at 60. I don't know who back in the day made the determination that was the number, but right at 60 is what you're talking about, basically a completely neutral player that didn't really have any positive or negative impact on the game. The closer the guy is to 60, the more you probably won't notice him at all on a football field, right? Now, when you're getting lower than that, down in the low 50s and 40s and 30s and things like that, then you go, wow, okay, this guy really struggled today. Or if you have that across a whole season, he's really been struggling. And then obviously the higher you get, let's say right now Shedeur Sanders is hovering right around a 90 or 91. We think of 90 and above as like the elite stuff, right? So like those are the best players in the country. Get into the 80s, those guys are really good. 70s is more like solid starter kind of guys, like it could be like B to B minus kind of guys. If you're in the 60s, you're like serviceable. So it's more so than about, we get so many arguments. One of the famous arguments that we get all the time from on the NFL side, like Steelers and Browns fans always arguing whether it's Myles Garrett or TJ Watt is better. It'll be like a half-point difference. And I sit here and I go, really, it's not the point. It doesn't matter. These two guys are both Hall of Fame caliber players. So a half-point difference or a 0.2 point difference doesn't mean one is explicitly better than the other. They're in the same kind of band. So sometimes people get too caught up in just the actual digits that are sitting there when it's such a small difference. But that's kind of the range that we look at, is if you kind of base it at 60, obviously the higher you go, you get into those elite players like a Shedeur or Travis Hunter, and then the guys who are struggling get a lot lower than that. And game to game and week to week and the season grade, it's not just an average of each week. There's some weird formula that goes into it that, again, data science people much smarter than me made those. So I've always worked on the football stuff. I know how to grade each individual play. I used to coach. I coached high school for a while, and then I got into this, especially during COVID. So I was kind of lucky that this is where I ended up. But no, that's pretty much the summary on how the grades work. And it's really more about kind of the bands when you think about groups of guys who are elite and then good and then average and so forth.
Yeah. So with respect to that, you mentioned that data-driven approach is your forte, right? And that is kind of the backbone to how you come to some of these predictions this year, including with the Buffs. And this offseason, the CU program took quite a beating from all media, all forms of media. And it was pretty much universally assumed by all the fans that this team was going to come back. It was the same as the 4-8 team as last year. They just retooled in the portal, but then the portal didn't actually benefit CU as much as the CU fans thought. At what point in time did you start to suspect that this team was better than people were giving it credit for?
I think for me, as it's probably, I liked their approach. Let me start with the portal thing first, because I thought you could argue, Coach Prime came in last year and he's inheriting the worst team in the Power 5. And he's just bringing in any sort of talent he can find, including all the Jackson State guys, right? And there was some other guys that came in, talk about Jimmy Horn, Xavier Weaver, just some other guys from other schools. He's getting the Jackson State guys, getting Shedeur and Hunter comfortable there, just bringing in any sort of talent to bring any excitement to a program that was really at rock bottom, right? And what he did this year was take the holes of last year's team and really attack that in the portal. And he's talked about it in a million press conferences where he goes, listen, it's easy for me, especially being Deion Sanders, to go and get skill guys, to go get receivers and corners, because that's what I do. He's prime time, that's it. Plus his son is a fantastic quarterback, and that helps. He goes, we knew it's harder to get linemen and pass rushers and run defenders and linebackers and things like that. Those guys, you really have to convince those guys, especially when you're not a coach that's your specialty, right? So I think it was a much more targeted approach in this year's portal. Obviously, to get offensive linemen, and it sure helps to get the number one offensive tackle from high school in the country, and Jordan Seaton. He's playing great lately. And I just think it takes time. I think people forgot, because it's so flashy and because it's Coach Prime. It's so rare that college programs turn around in 1 year. That's not how college football, even in today's accelerated world with the portal and NIL and all this, it's not designed to turn around in 1 year, right? And even any other program, that goes from 1 win and as bad as Colorado was in 22 to 4-8 and reasonably competitive, they'd be praising the living hell out of the coach. But because it's Deion and because everything was under the spotlight and they got off to such a good start, it is what it is as far as the criticism. Plus, they were playing in arguably the toughest conference in the country last year. It was loaded. Now, what I started to realize was prepping for our preview of the UCF game. And I was watching them over, first of all, the second half against Nebraska. Okay, everybody says, well, they went into Nebraska and they got the floor wiped with them. And yeah, for about 20 to 25 minutes, that was the case. But I think people forget they did not give up a point in the second half of that game. There was several games last year where they get in that spot, and what happened? They would lose by 40 because they just didn't have the horses, right? And they, especially in their front seven and things like that. So, I'm watching this team. I'm watching them against Colorado State, watching them especially against Baylor, the Hail Mary, keeping themselves in the game. It felt like that entire game they were down by 7 and just trying to stay in it and punch after punch, haymaker after haymaker. And I just felt like there was a different – and I don't have like this, it's a word I don't have an analytical thing for, but I felt a different resilience from this team that we didn't see last year. Last year when they got punched in the teeth, they kept rolling over, right? This year I was like, you know what? They've taken their lumps. They're probably really tired of getting really, honestly, if I'm putting it lightly, getting all the shit talked about them, right? When they're just getting whipped every week last year. They're punching back, and they're starting to punch back. And I'm looking at their run defense and some things in the trenches, and I go, now they're starting to get it. They're starting to figure out how to win. And that UCF game was so big. And even, you get up to the K-State game, tough loss, but now you bounce back with 2 dominant wins. It's a team last year that didn't punch back. And now they do. And when we go over our scheme stuff and players and all that stuff, but I think that's the biggest thing first is this is a team that they take it on the chin and then they throw a counter punch. And we did not see that last year.
Yeah. No, I think that we've been vocal on our pod about this a lot. We definitely saw that difference. And you brought up a great point about filling the holes in the portal. We felt so gaslit because we saw that happening during the offseason. We saw them bring in the D linemen. We saw them bring the new offensive linemen, saying they're plugging the holes. Those are very clearly the biggest weak points of the team, and they're addressing them. Why are they still being disrespected and treated this way? So it's great hearing that from you.
Yeah, no, I mean it's one of those things where and that just those big meat and potatoes guys, right? Those defensive tackles and those linebackers. One of my favorite players on the team, honestly, is Nakai Hill-Green. I think once they started him over Trevor Woods, it really brought more attitude to their front seven. Or there was a hit. I saw Levante Bentley hit somebody yesterday. I was like, oh, that did not happen last year, right? Or I just think those guys are the guys that bring the attitude to your football team, right? I think you always talk about, every coach talks about trenches. We have to win in the trenches. And, if we're being objective about it, Colorado last year was horrible in the trenches. Everybody knows it on both sides of the ball, on the defense as well as the offensive line, right? This year, they're solid. Are they Georgia or Alabama or something? No, but they're at least I would say their front seven on defense is at least above average, and their offensive line is playing closer to an average level. And even then, we have a saying at PFF with offensive line stuff, with your creep back to average. If you're terrible, you're terrible. Creep back to average, okay? They're not going to go and have the best O-line in the country overnight, but they're playing right now like a relatively average offensive line. And if you have that for Shedeur, and we already know, you protect Shedeur, you're going to score a lot of points because in my personal opinion, I think he's the best quarterback in the country. I'd probably put Cam Ward second right behind him, but you protect Shedeur, great things happen. Not just good things, great things happen. So it's coming together, and I really feel like these last 2 wins especially are their most complete team wins that I have seen since Shedeur Sanders became the head coach.
No doubt.
Taking a step back, Dalton, people have been, the sky was falling in college football, right? Pac-12 died. Big 12 was on life support there for a long time. People are saying NIL's ruining the game. All kinds of doom and gloom around college sports. And you talked about, people were mad because Coach Prime comes in, deletes the roster, brings in an entirely new thing. And that was, breaking news. I guess my question would be, looking at where we are now in week 8 or whatever this is, week 9, you had a ranked Army and Navy. You had Vanderbilt beating Alabama. You've got one of probably the best college football seasons ever. You watch a lot of college football, obviously. Colorado looks good. Indiana's done a complete turnaround at a program that people said that could never happen at. What are your thoughts about just generally is college football okay? Is this an anomaly of a season? Is this just the excitement of all these new matchups? Or is this kind of indicative of, in your opinion, are things going to be all right?
Dead cat bounce. Like, is it just a dead cat bounce? We get one good year and then it's all falling apart.
No, I don't think so at all. I think, first of all, I've been calling it the season of chaos because it's the first year where we have this, right? And it's only going to get better as we go when we get that first round of home playoff games. But no, I think, look, does there need to be probably more regulation from the NCAA or somebody about NIL and the portal and just how loose it is? And it is a Wild West out here, sure. But I mean, look, coaches, if these are the rules the way they are, coaches like Coach Prime or Kurt Signetti or any of these other teams, they're going to take advantage of it. Why wouldn't you? If you could build a team overnight, why wouldn't you, right? It used to take 5 years to build a program. Now you can do it in 1 or 2. So I don't blame the coaches one bit for doing it the way they've been doing it. I think it's incredible. I think we should have been having this expanded playoff for a long time. And I think what you're seeing, a lot of those teams you mentioned, yeah, it gives them a chance because they can go and acquire talent, right? You mentioned Vanderbilt going and getting Diego Pavia and an Eli Stowers and guys like that from New Mexico State, Colorado, all the guys they get. Indiana, Kurt Signetti bringing darn near his whole team from James Madison, and then is getting his quarterback, Curtis Rourke from Ohio, who's a really good player down there. I do love, too, that it gives an opportunity for a lot of those excellent group of 5 players to come up and play with the big boys, right? Like Kurt Signetti in the old system, if he would have gone to Indiana and took over that team, it might have taken him 5 years to fix that thing. And even then, maybe he wouldn't have done it, because I heard somebody said something really great about that situation was coaches always talk about they got to get their guys in here. Well, now they can get their guys in instantly, right? So it's just like Coach Prime with Colorado. Well, he can bring Shedeur and Hunter and Shiloh and all those other guys he wants with him because he knows they're talented and they can stick together. They already know the culture. So it's certainly a different game, but I love the parity behind it. How could you not love a sport now that went from, in past years, we would talk about for the entire season, like 6 or 8 teams and the same 6 or 8 teams every year, right? Bama, Clemson, Georgia, maybe Texas, Ohio State, Michigan, LSU, or, whatever the short list is right now. I've been kind of keeping a board lately of how many teams are really still relatively alive for the playoff, right? This past week, I had it somewhere around 40. And then 6 or 7, I think, got just about knocked off this week, barring some miracles. But I go, okay, we're 5 weeks out. And we have 30-something teams relevant for the playoff. If I get Power 5, Group of 5, all that stuff. I mean, think about it. Even Boise State, UNLV on a Friday night is appointment viewing. Are you kidding me? Like, they're 2 great teams who now have a shot to compete at the highest level. So love the parity, love the competitiveness. And I think we are no longer going to get to a point where the last 3 or 4 weeks of college football just suck. Because I think that we had years like that where we were like, even last year, we got to like 4 weeks left, and I think there was like 9 teams that we would look at. And that's really all that mattered. None of the other games mattered. Now, especially with the way the conference title thing is where, the top 5 highest ranked conference champs, you win your conference, you're probably ranked in all likelihood. There's probably not going to be, if you win the Big 12, let's say, there's probably not going to be, especially without the Pac-12, 5 other conferences ranked ahead of you. So it makes it so much more fun. I love the parity. I think it's more competitive than ever. And I think it's been a combination of things that have contributed to that.
And just a quick follow-up on that. People talked about parity on rosters. And like you mentioned, Alabama no longer looks impossible. There's no real Goliath. Watching these games, it doesn't feel like one team is impossibly better than any of the other ones. Has that kind of shown up on your grades where teams still have obviously high octane firepower kind of guys, but more teams have people that are maybe above average grades because starting positions and NIL money and all the different factors that are going in is kind of elevating all ships. You don't have great guys sitting behind people for 3 years hoping to get their chance, or maybe, I don't know. I was just curious, like, has that kind of shown up in your grades? Are you seeing teams that historically would not have plus guys necessarily having that kind of experience, or is it kind of here and there?
Yeah, I think it plays out the most, honestly, more so than the grading, because, sometimes it can get kind of tilted with which conference you're playing in and some teams with strength of schedule and things like that. So I think it's more about just you do see a leveling of the talent pool where almost any team, I would honestly say there's probably maybe only 4 or 5 teams in the entire Power 5 who I don't think are a threat to win in almost any game, right? I think about like a team like Mississippi State's been struggling, or a Florida State this year has been really struggling. That's not the case most years, but it's happened this year where I just think you see that it's every team with the talent base more spread. Like I think there really used to be this bigger talent gap between the top like 15 teams in the country. Because, you had teams that were hoarding 5-star quarterbacks left and right. I look at Pitt. Okay, let's take Pitt as an example. Eli Holstein, okay, big time recruit, high 4-star quarterback, went to Alabama, was like a big deal. He was maybe going to be the next guy at Bama. Didn't get the job over Jalen Milroe. Okay, he can walk out the door and go to a school like Pitt and have the season he's having, right? So I think, or a Kyle McCord at Syracuse, even though last Thursday was rough, but a guy like that would never end up at Syracuse before. He would get benched at Ohio State and sit there the rest of his career. So it's a greater opportunity for that talent to spread. And yeah, I mean, honestly, you look at some of these games and I think you just see, to me, I see less blowouts. I mean, how many weeks, in the past did we see like half the games are 50-10 blowouts because one team just has so much more talent than the other? I can build a case even in almost every game that we preview, even if it's like an average team like Texas Vandy last week. I could build a case for Vanderbilt to beat Texas. When could I ever do that before? So you're seeing it. You're seeing the talent filter down. You're seeing these things get more wide open, and it's becoming more. And I love this. I think it's the NFL is like this. It's becoming more about how do you coach it? How does your talent play up, and how do they execute on the field every week, as opposed to, okay, this team's just so much more clearly better than the other one. And you have those games. You're going to have those games, but there's much further and fewer between. I see a lot more even football when I watch it, and it does show in some of the numbers.
Yeah. So shifting gears, but also kind of on the topic about parity, the Heisman race this year seems really, really, really exciting. And we're seeing the very high likelihood or potential for there to be a non-quarterback Heisman, one of which is Travis Hunter. Another one is obviously Ashton Jeanty at Boise. Who do you have? How are you handicapping that race right now?
Those are certainly the two guys. And I know the quarterbacks are always going to get the love. Cam Ward's having a great season. Dylan Gabriel's having a great season. I got to be honest with you. I think Shedeur Sanders has been playing that caliber of season. I think if he's not in your top 5 or 6 for the Heisman, I know he's got Hunter and a bunch of weapons, but just plays great football just about every week except for the Nebraska game, which the whole team didn't play well. Okay, you can't have one bad game. It's kind of unfair. But no, I mean, I think – it's very hard between Jeanty and Hunter because I get the argument for both. The one thing I will say is for Travis Hunter, Jeanty, he's doing things we haven't seen in a long time. I love him. I got to be honest, he's one of the best college running backs I've ever seen. It's amazing. And as far as Hunter, right now, like let's take an example of our grades. I was looking at this earlier in the day. I believe he is 8th among wide receivers in our receiving grade. And I think he's 7th. I want to say it was 7th among all cornerbacks in our coverage grade. Think about that. He's a top 8 player at both positions. And if he played either one exclusively, he might just be the best one in the country. They're both ridiculous, but I think right now you have to handicap it as you could flip a coin between the two because Jeanty's amazing, and he's proven for a year and a half. Last year against Washington, the national runner-ups, he had a big game. Against UCLA last year, that was an elite defense with Leatu Latu and those guys. Had a big-time game. He shredded Oregon. When they played Oregon, they almost won that game. Jeanty's incredible. Hunter's incredible. You could flip a coin for me between those two guys and pick either, and I could absolutely see the argument. But I think you're right. You're seeing a year where, right this minute at least, it shouldn't be a quarterback. I don't believe that. I know Cam Ward's done what he's done. I know Dylan Gabriel's going to be the quarterback of a team that's most likely undefeated, very likely going to be the 1 seed at the end of the day. But I've never been a fan of just the quarterback on the best team argument. I was a huge proponent of Jaden Daniels winning it last year. I was screaming the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season last year for Jaden Daniels to win it because that team gave up 142 points in their 3 losses. I don't know what you want Jaden to do about that. So sometimes you just have to pick the best player, and it's going to be a fun race between Jeanty and Hunter to see who the best player is and how we decide that at the end of the season because I think it's very close between the two.
Yeah. Before I hand it back over to Jake, our interim coach after they fired Carl Burrell in 2022, Mike Sanford, he's a Boise State alum, and he was our coach. And it's been really funny seeing him on social media talk about handicapping those two things because there was a time where he was like, Jeanty for sure. And then all of a sudden Hunter comes out yesterday, 4 pass breakups, 2 touchdowns, 153 yards. And so seeing him in particular react to this has been really fun. And he really doesn't want to play favorites either, because he's like, oh man, this is such a difficult situation for me, because we Colorado fans, we love Mike Sanford because he came into our program in a very unstable time. But anyways, I just wanted to comment on that because I thought it was kind of funny. Go ahead, Jake.
Oh yeah. Speaking of those elite players, Dalton, I know you do a lot of draft analysis. If you're an NFL GM, who's coming off first off your board for the number one overall pick?
So that's a tough one, because I think we have a draft where it's really going to depend who's picking, which team is picking first. Now, if it were just neutral, if we're not putting a logo on the hat, we're just saying who's the best football player in the country, I do think it's Travis Hunter. How could you not take a chance on a freak like that? And honestly, as he continues to play 130 snaps every week that he's healthy, I mean, you have to really sit here and examine whether, like, could he actually do this at the NFL level and maybe play, maybe not 100% of the snaps, but even if it's 80 to 85, I mean, he's so talented. Right now in this draft, he would be one of the two best receivers and one of the two best corners, and you get both of those things in the same body. It's so hard. It's one of the most, if not the most fascinating draft case for a single player maybe that we've ever seen. I don't even, there isn't a comp there. Even Deion Sanders himself and Charles Woodson aren't comps, because you knew, okay, they're going to play corner, they're going to return kicks, maybe they get a rep or two at receiver. Travis Hunter's the first guy. I mean, it's like he's going out there at the highest level of college football and doing what kids usually can only do in high school, and they have to be the special kids even to do it in high school, right? I mean, I've even coached kids who were incredible. I've seen one or two of them who are in the NFL now, as I've used to coach down in Florida, and they couldn't even do it every snap like that. Like, we might play one at corner full time, and then maybe gets 15 to 20 snaps at receiver in a game. So it's fascinating. If I had just a neutral gray hat on, didn't know which team I was running, I would say Travis Hunter is the best player. It almost has to go first in this draft.
It's like Ohtani, right? Basically, that's the only thing I can think of. Like Shohei Ohtani. Hopefully he comes back and pitches too, but that was just so different. Even if he's not the best player, best hitter, or the best pitcher in the league, like being able to combine those into one force is wild. And
yeah,
I'm excited.
And I think even if you try it out and it doesn't work, he could be elite at one or the other. I mean, he's honestly, him and probably Will Johnson, I would say, are the two best corners in the country. And then I'd probably say him and Tetero and McMillan are right now, I think you could argue, the two best, or at least the two best receiver prospects in the country. It's just incredible what he can do on either side. The fact that he can do both makes it so fascinating. But even if he was just a receiver, I think he would go in the top 15 or so in this draft. I really do. And if he was just a corner, he'd go in the top 12 to 15 also. The factoring of both is what could make him go number one, but he's a top 12 to 15 player at either spot at any position in the country. I'm so fascinated to see how GMs are going to handle this whole process.
And then follow up on that, the running thing has been, potentially number one, number two. We're obviously hopeful for that, but where do you have Shedeur on your board? I know Cam Ward's getting a lot of attention. Shedeur seems like one of those guys where the accuracy is going to help him a lot at the NFL level, but his disinterest in throwing the ball away might potentially hurt him as well. A few other factors. Do you see him as a potential number one quarterback off the board? I know it's a little bit early. It's hard to make that determination right now.
I think, and look, it feels like QB1 for the consensus changes every week. I mean, we've got Carson Beck, we've got Garrett Nussmeier, we've got Jalen Milroe, we've got these two. I haven't done a cross-positional board yet, and Trevor Sycamore, he's the best in the business. He's got the PFF big board up on our website. He's updating it almost every week. And for me personally, I think Shedeur is the best quarterback. I think he's the best quarterback in the country. And what it is I think mentally, he's the most NFL ready right now. The second, I watched a little bit of him at Jackson State, a handful of games, but the second he got to Colorado, I remember watching that TCU game, the very first game he was there. And his ability to process defenses, I don't think anybody in college football right now matches that. He can see safety rotations. He can see man and zone. He understands, for the most part, when he needs to get rid of the football. I think some of the playmaking and holding the ball too long, because we did charge him. We blamed him for a lot of the pressures on him last year, for sure. And that rate has come down this year. I haven't looked at the exact number this week, but it's definitely a lower percentage that we have charged to him, because there's times where we charge pressures to offensive lines and offensive linemen and tight ends and whoever else is blocking. But there are times when we have to take into account in the grading process, okay, he held the ball too long or he broke a clean pocket. So we do have a metric where we chart when it's a quarterback's fault. But honestly, I think his arm is probably like a B+. He doesn't have a like a Trevor Lawrence or Justin Herbert type of arm, but it's certainly good enough. I think it's at least on par with Burrow, if not a little bit better. Accuracy is really good. I think his footwork when he's in rhythm is really good. He improvises to throw, which I like. He throws first. He's not, he's every bit of a decent athlete, right? He's not Jaden Daniels or even Caleb Williams. He's not going to do that. He'll take off and run here and there. I really do. I kind of think the athletic traits are in a similar vein of a Joe Burrow. I think that's kind of the level where he's going to improvise to throw. You're going to see 3 or 4 times a game he takes off for a first down. But for me, it's the mental side of it. It is just the constant understanding of what defenses are trying to do as long as he has protection. And we say that for any quarterback. I mean, any quarterback needs pass protection to succeed. Clean pockets are often the key to success. If he has them, we saw it the other night against Cincinnati. Cincinnati, I mentioned in our preview, you send 3 and drop 8 against Shedeur Sanders, good luck. And if that works, go ahead and buy a lottery ticket because he's just going to sit there and he's going to see it and he's going to pick it apart. I don't think because of all the flash and circumstance that comes around Colorado, I think Shedeur and even Travis Hunter to an extent, I don't think they get enough credit for how darn high their football IQ is. And I think Shedeur's got the best football IQ of any quarterback in the country. He sees defenses incredibly well, like an NFL passer right now. That's why he's so good. I think he's best quarterback in the country. I think Cam Ward is creeping up as a pretty close second. I think those two guys pretty clear to me, but I've had Shedeur number 1 since the beginning of the season, and I'll continue to have him until I see something falter, but I don't know exactly what that would be.
I like that you added Dalton real quick, Topher, just because no one points that out for Travis. He's a 4.0 student, and you could see multiple picks he had this year was in the flat. And a lot of those, he knew what play was coming. So that's what makes him unique and special is his brains and his smart. So I'm happy you added that.
The play I loved in this Cincinnati game, there was a play, was it Jimmy Horn or Wester was running that shallow, and he gets his body in front for that little pick block on that guy. Because, if you come back towards the line of scrimmage, it's a penalty. And he didn't crack him. And it's not the first time I've seen him do it this year. And he just stands there like a basketball pick and puts his hands up. And he's like, or what was the play a couple weeks ago when LeJonte scored the touchdown? And it was down down by the left pylon. And he's literally pointing at him to like, go, I got you. Like, Travis Hunter's in-game awareness of stuff is crazy when you really look at it. And I do actually think it's the fact that he plays both sides. I think that helps, right? Like you talk about, a lot of those picks have come in zone coverage. The fact that he understands route concepts and how they work, he brings it to the defensive side with him. Then I see, especially, the touchdown right before the half against Cincinnati. You can see how he understands how to find space and how to, especially against zone coverage, figure out where he needs to be. And it's because he understands, because he runs it on defense. So your football, not only his physical talent, your football IQ has to be so high to play both sides at the college level where the schemes are not easy. They might be college kids, but these coaches throw everything at them because they're trying to win. Both of those guys, and Shedeur, again, the pedigree, coming up, growing up with Deion Sanders as his dad, there's no way he doesn't know X's and O's, right? He just does. I think he doesn't get enough credit for being the master of it. It's incredible how smart those two guys are.
We love high football IQ here. I muted myself there. But part of being a fan and being a diehard fan is like supporting the role players, what I call it. Because obviously there's star players, and everyone knows Travis and Shedeur. Everybody that follows college football at all know those two names. But has there been anybody on the roster that has kind of been an unsung hero, kind of been like under the radar, but performing really well and being effective in helping the team be where they are today? We have a couple of names, obviously, but we don't have the PFF grades in front of us to kind of back our eye test.
Absolutely. I'll tell you what you just said is the reason that Colorado is so much better this year is because they have so many more role players doing their job, right? I'll start on the defensive side actually with the run game and what their linebackers have brought, I think, to their run game, and especially their defensive tackles too. But I think when they put Nakai Hill-Green, the transfer from Charlotte, in at linebacker in the starting spot over Trevor Woods, you could see an immediate effect of just more fundamentally sound play in run defense. Because actually, the running and run defense was actually their two lowest graded things last year for us on last year's team. Especially run defense, it was in the bottom, I think, 12 in our run defense grades. You could just see the D-line was playing a little better. BJ Green, Deion Hayes, and Shane Cokes and all those guys. But when Hill Green went in there and they had that second linebacker that could fill gaps and they didn't need any safety help anymore on most plays, you saw it change, right? So I think Hill Green was a guy for me that stood out. Lately, I see BJ Green really starting to become the pass rusher that he was at Arizona State. He was a terrific pass rusher at Arizona State. He's one of the best pass rushers in the Big 12. Got off to a slow start. They're kind of figuring out how to use him, but he's a guy. And then I think, I don't think we give enough credit to the other weapons. This is a loaded receiving core on offense, right? It's not just Travis Hunter. Jimmy Horn's a really good player. He was a good player at USF. LeJontay Wester, I went to Florida Atlantic, okay, FAU down there. I knew what LeJontay Wester could do. I know what FAU is. He was their offense. And I watched him carry that team by himself for 2 years. And when they got him as a fit in the slot for a team that throws to the slot more than almost any other team in the country, I was like, he's going to fit in. I know he's going to fit in. And Will Shepard, too, gives him a big body, contested catch guy to work with. He makes some nice plays. Got to work on the hands a little bit, but he makes nice plays. This is a loaded receiving core. So you have Hunter, and everyone thinks it's just Shedeur and Hunter. And some days it is. I won't lie to you. This Cincinnati game, I mean, those two are great. But offensively and defensively, I think especially in the front seven, and that receiving core, that I think they're one of the toughest teams to defend in the country when Shedeur has clean pockets, because you've got at least 4 legitimate weapons. And it really hurt too, I thought, when Amarion Miller got that injury, because that was like a 5th guy who was like, oh, they just have guys everywhere. I think it helps that every single guy is a threat every play on offense, but there's so much more deep than last year. I could go through so many names, but that's been the difference in this team, again, is that targeted approach in the portal, the amount of depth that this team has, that they can beat you in more than one way, and they can beat you in a balanced effort like we've seen the last 2 games. Again, these last 2 games are by far the best games they've played all season. It's just a complete team effort. They continue that these last 4 games, they could get themselves towards 10 wins, because they got a lot more good players than just Shedeur and Travis.
Yeah, so looking ahead to the schedule, Colorado is on the bye next weekend. Big 12 is, part of the I guess downside of having conferences with 800 teams in them is that you can only have 2 teams in your conference championship game. Kind of looking ahead, we've been debating it a bit on our pod. It seems like BYU and Iowa State both have pretty easy paths moving forward. Colorado should be, if they continue to play like they have, favored in every game moving forward, but unfortunately does not control their own destiny. What are your thoughts kind of looking forward on this Big 12? Any games that we should keep on our radar that people listening, when they're browsing the channels next week might want to pay extra attention to?
Next week, Big 12. There's not a ton big in the Big 12. The biggest one I know is Texas Tech and Iowa State. There's not a ton of Big 12 games this coming week, but Texas Tech, Iowa State stands out. I'm seeing if Kansas State is off this week too. I don't remember. I know we're previewing the Iowa State game. Kansas State goes to Houston. This is a light week. This is a very light week for the Big 12. Texas Tech, Iowa State's the big one. And I think the big thing is Iowa State. They're at home. It's a big advantage. We'll see if Texas Tech has Baron Morton. I'm not sure, because he got hurt in the last game in their loss to TCU. They could have true freshman Will Hammond starting. But Iowa State's the one team of the 4 contenders. Here's what I'll say about that game you need to watch. Colorado's got a solid run defense. They fix that. Kansas State's got a good run defense. That 4th team. What's that 4th team again? BYU's got a good run defense. Sorry, I go through so many of them all the time. Iowa State, I have said for a long time that the Big 12 is going to be decided by 2 things: quarterback play and run defense, because there's so many good rushing attacks in the Big 12. And Iowa State is the one team of those top 4 that I'm kind of suspicious that they might not have that. They're much more of a skill-oriented team. The secondary's really good. The receivers are incredible. Rocco Becht is solid, but they're not great in the trenches, and they're going to have to see Taj Brooks, this big 230-pound back for Texas Tech this week. And we saw last week, R.J. Harvey just absolutely tore up Iowa State, and UCF just couldn't make a stop. But Texas Tech has a more well-rounded offense than UCF did, and if they get Taj Brooks going against Iowa State, there is some upset potential there. Iowa State is the team I really question of the group in the trenches, so this is a big test for them. And later in the year, too, their last game of the regular season is a home matchup against Kansas State. Anytime you've got a team that's weak in the trenches, they could be vulnerable, right? They were in a tight game with West Virginia and pulled away, a tight game with UCF and almost lost it. That's a thing for Iowa State. They're really the team I'm looking at this week. They're in the one big game in the Big 12 this week. A lot of the bigger teams are off. BYU is off. K-State, I think, is playing. I think I saw Houston. That's kind of an easy one. They should come away with that. But that's going to be a big thing. Those are two things I've said, quarterback play and run defense. And most of the teams at the top have gotten that. But Iowa State's kind of the one I question the most right now.
That's extra heartbreaking because we've spent a lot of time trash talking Texas Tech, and now we have to cheer for them this weekend. So it'll be, plus it's a nice preview for our, that'll be our opponent the week after. So we get a whole week to prepare, and hopefully, we'll have a better idea as to what the Big 12 race generally looks like kind of moving down the home stretch.
Yep. I got a quick follow-up here too. So in the preseason, after last season, there was definitely a narrative about who the powers in the Big 12 were going to be. Everyone thought that Utah, Arizona, the kind of the Pac-12 defectors were going to be the teams that came in and controlled. No one really had BYU in the radar. A lot of people, I thought, predicted them middling. I saw some people even predict them towards the end. What do you think kind of happened there with that predictive process that was so wrong this year in the Big 12?
Oh boy, this is a fun question because so have you guys seen in any of the BYU games, like on ESPN, when they'll show the graphic of Jake Retzloff holding the phone, the graphic, and there's a list that shows he's at the bottom of the Big 12 in the preseason rankings for quarterbacks. Yeah. That's actually my list that I made in the preseason.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so that's been a whole thing that's been a theme on our show, and even I was on a BYU show last week, and we had a lot of fun with it. But that's actually my list that he's holding up. So it's been incredible. Let me start with Jake Retzloff because it starts there. It always starts with your quarterback. For PFF grades, the single most improved quarterback in the country. Last year, it was his first year up from JUCO. He came to BYU, made 4 starts, and it was ugly. It looked like a guy who was making his first 4 starts in the FBS for a team that was not good. There was nothing about BYU last year that was particularly good, and he did struggle. And I go between the inexperience and the struggles and the fact that he was in a legit quarterback battle with former Baylor QB Gary Bohannon, which I wasn't even sure he was going to win at the time that I made that list. It's a thing, but sometimes getting things wrong is fun. And BYU's been a lot of fun to watch. It starts with the quarterback. He's an explosive playmaker. I actually think when I was watching more of him, I watch him every week because it's such a big story now, and it's certainly for me, it's a huge story. But it's going to sound crazy, and we're talking college only here. Reminds me a lot of Zach Wilson. He does. He's got the same skill set. I think Wilson's arm was a little bit better, and I think Jake might be even a little bit better athlete. He has carried them in times when their running backs have been hurt, and he's been their leading rusher all season. He's now getting more involved that their running backs are healthy. He's making explosive plays. He's one of the best throwers down the middle of the field in the country. It is. He's so comfortable, and he's fearless. He just lets it rip. It starts with Retzloff and going from having a super subpar quarterback situation last year to a guy who I can honestly say, I think this year he's been the second best quarterback in the Big 12. If I was redoing that whole list, which I'm sure I'd get killed for, I would put him second this year behind Shedeur. He's been that good within the Big 12 and got a huge win. The win against Kansas State, when they beat Kansas State by like 30 earlier in the year, it just shot his confidence up and the whole team's confidence up so much. The second thing, their defense is so much better than last year. I think it's the best defense in the Big 12 right now. I think they're just so much more fundamentally sound. And I can't even give you I could throw out some names, but it's not about 1 or 2 star first-round guys that are emerging. They play such balanced, complementary football. I think they are the most well-rounded team in the Big 12. I believe, honestly, I think they're going to make the playoff. I think they're going to make they have a pretty easy road on the back end here. I think BYU is the team. They're going to make the Big 12 title game. I think they're going to make the playoff. There isn't a whole lot of reason they shouldn't finish the regular season 12-0. They're so well-rounded, but it's Retzloff and it's their defense emerging as big-time guys. They need to just take care of business the rest of the way, and they're going to get where they want to go.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with the Holy War coming up because those rivalry games can be a toss-up sometimes. Utah's been very, very disappointing, though. I think we were all stunned about kind of what happened there, especially because Cam Rising did play a little bit and he just did not look good. There was what was that game where Cam Rising was like he threw 2 or 3 picks, and then he was out for the season right after that. Was that against Arizona?
Arizona State.
Arizona State. That's right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been really fascinating to see like things get flipped like that in the conference.
Yeah. Oh no, it's a wild. I think you've got the other conferences have kind of gone the way we thought. The SEC is a bit wild because we've seen some fun upsets, but we've seen most of the usual suspects in the Big Ten. The ACC, there's some fun at the top, but we kind of figure Miami, Clemson are the 2 teams. The Big 12, I thought, was the most unpredictable conference in the country, honestly. And in the preseason, I'll be honest with you, in the preseason, because they had Fafita and I picked Arizona to win it, and that doesn't look a whole lot of great right now. But we've seen all sorts of predictions in the preseason. I saw Utah picked a lot. I saw Oklahoma State picked by some. I saw K-State picked by some. I saw some were dark horse in UCF towards the Big 12 time. I mean, Kansas was supposed to be a lot better than they are. I mean, it was so. The Big 12 was the hardest conference to predict. And then you've got the Colorado X factor of, are they any better? Now you got BYU exploding out of nowhere. I mean, it's been, I would argue the SEC's been a lot of fun, but this top to bottom maybe is the most fun conference to watch right now because you really don't know what's going to happen any given week. It's become, now it's starting to come into a little clearer focus with these top 4, but it was the hardest conference to predict in the preseason. And I think it's still the hardest conference to predict right now. I feel the safest right now about BYU's chances of at least making the Big 12 title game. I think their road is the easiest to get there moving forward, but I could see any of these 4 teams winning the conference. It's wide open.
All right. I think we're running low on time, so I don't know if this will be the last question officially or not, but Ralphie 6 is currently running for the University of Colorado. And as you presumptively are aware, Ralphie is the Buffalo that charges the team out on the field. However, the current Ralphie 6 has quite a bit of controversy as she has barely been able to run past the 50-yard line, and apparently did not run the second time this past week because she was too sleepy because the game kicked off too late for her. My question for you is, when can we expect a PFF Buffalo run grade so we can officially know whether Ralphie 6 is actually living up to the expectations that were set by the 5 Buffalo before her?
You think maybe if you get some analytical proof there that you can kind of start motivating a little bit and maybe get a little more effort.
Whatever you did for the BYU quarterback, we need that for this Buffalo, I think, so we can show it to her.
We're calling on the master motivator.
Dalton. We need some bulletin board material. I think
I could figure something out, or maybe I can find a metric. Some of our data science people I could talk to and get you a metric for that. No, it's the one thing that's hardest to quantify sometimes is effort, right? I need, trust me, if I could find us or have somebody make us an effort metric, it would be fantastic. I'd be like, oh, they're not even trying hard enough. Come on now. But no, that would be a lot of fun, wouldn't it? Just be like, man, if they would just try a little harder, they might see the grades propped up now. But no, that would be fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Love it. Well, thanks for joining us, Dalton. I think that's all we had. Just for any Buffs fans, I highly recommend tuning into the PFF College Football Show. It's a great show. Even if you're just a college football fan, they do a phenomenal job just taking it from an analytical perspective. Dalton, do you want to kind of plug how people can find you on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. At PFF _Dalton, DALTON. We've got all our great written content also on PFF.com. The PFF Plus subscription gives you all the access to all the data that I get to have fun looking at every day. And then we've got the PFF College Football Show. Myself and Max Chadwick, we review and preview all the biggest games of the week. And I can guarantee you when we have the Colorado-Texas Tech game, when they get back from the bye week, that'll certainly be a preview. Big 12 is going to be a fun race down the stretch. We'll be going over a lot of those games. It's Tuesday nights for the preview, 6 Eastern, 4 Mountain Time for you guys. The Sunday morning one's a little earlier. We do it at 9 a.m. Eastern because we want to get into NFL Sunday. But you can always go on our YouTube channel and watch that back. And we cut up each game too. So if you just want to watch a Colorado game, it's all there for you in the YouTube channel, PFF College Football Show. And I'm PFF _Dalton on Twitter.
Great. Thank you so much, Dalton. And with that, thank you for listening to Folsom Frenzy Podcast. Let's go Buffs.
Let's go Buffs.